probably 90%, more than 90% of startups don't achieve their target. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm assuming that's the case. So I think that my take is be honest and work smartly around building up that forecast. So if you think you can get there, sure, but how do you get there?
Welcome to French Tech on Air Romanian Touch, the podcast that takes you on an exciting journey into the heart of Romania's vibrant tech and innovation ecosystem. Today, we will have Eric Bartha, Head of Investment Management at SeedBlink, one of Europe's fastest growing investment platforms, disrupting startup funding. Eric, it's nice to have you here today. Welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Eric, can you share a bit more insights about, who you are, what are you doing exactly at SeedBlink and stuff like that?
Sure. So first of all, I'm Eric. I'm 24 now. I was born in Switzerland, but I grew up in Bucharest since I was 3 years old until I was 18. I grew up in Bucharest, but I went to the French school here. So that's, where the French touch somehow comes from. My parents also live in France. My sister also lives in France. So I have an affinity, let's say, to France. And I also live in Paris now for the past year. I then did my studies in Austria. I studied international business in Austria. And then came back to Romania during 2020 already, so almost 3 years now, more than 3 years actually. I then did a couple of internships. One of them was at BCR in their accelerator program Innovix, and that's how I also came across SeedBlink, which was, I think, even in 2020, it was one of the most active investors in the Romanian market back then, and that's how I came across the name. I applied for the job, joined the team in February 2021, so more than 2 years and a half now. And I also did a master's in the meantime. While joining SeedBlink, I discovered a bit of the world of fintech and what how technology can help financial services. And I found that extremely interesting, and this is also what we're doing at SeedBlink. We're specializing on the investment part of that, and that's why I wanted to do a master's. So I did a master's in fintech in Italy, and then for the past year, so 1 year ago, I moved to Paris.
Cool, nice journey. So a lot of international experience. From what I understand, it's also part of your background as a person. You went in the French system while living in Romania and so on and so forth. So you grew up into that multicultural environment. Cool. So you joined SeedBlink 2 years and a half ago when the company had around 10 people, so to say. So it's a company that grew a lot, but can you give us concretely insights of what SeedBlink is exactly about?
Sure. So SeedBlink started December 2019, January 2020. So we are, we're almost 4 at the end of the year. The company was founded by four co-founders. So 2 people coming from the banking world. So Ionuț Pătrăhău and Andrei Dudoiu, they were, former bankers and worked at Banca Transilvania. And they, after, a career in banking, they felt the need somehow that there is a lack of adequate financial services for startups. And they started off with an accelerator, with a digital accelerator, but they very soon realized that without funding, accelerators are limited in the power and in the help they can actually provide startups. And so we have, the banking brain of the firm, and we also have the entrepreneurial brain and the IT brain of the firm, which are composed by Radu Georgescu and Carmen Sebe, which are the 2 other co-founders that we have. They are both serial entrepreneurs, very successful in what they've been doing with several exits under their belts. Radu was one of the first entrepreneurs that exited a company to Microsoft a couple of years back, and since then, they've been working together with Carmen for, I think, more than 10, 15 years already. So these are the four co-founders that started. And so SeedBlink actually started with the need to provide alternative funding for startups, but also, and maybe more importantly, to give the tools necessary for people to invest in technology companies and to benefit from the growth that technology companies can provide for investors. But the main risk that you have as an angel investor or as an individual investor, if you don't know how to negotiate some stuff, you might also get kicked out at the subsequent round. So there are lots of things that are somehow behind the hood, so to speak, of an investment. And what we do as SeedBlink is we take care of all the back office of what an investment is for individual people. So we allow people starting from 2,500 euros to invest in high growth technology companies and having the same rights as an institutional investor would. And this is something that we are doing in order to give people all the tools they need in order to invest in a professional way.
So it's very interesting because, obviously the company grew a lot with a large community of investors on one side and of course a lot of startups that had campaigns. But how was it at the beginning to understand the product fit in regards to the investors? So you explained very clearly, okay, it's obvious it's easier for business angels, but before taking such an initiative of launching a new company, in doing what SeedBlink is doing, how easy was it to understand this pain point from the business angels? Did the founders interview many of them to understand the pain point, or was it just so obvious and they just decided to make this way?
To be honest, I don't know exactly what their journey was. I just know that 2020 was a very interesting moment of time in which there were several things that happened. So first of all, there was the pandemic. Number one, the pandemic also allowed people, somehow gave them more time to be more interested in investments. You could see also with increased activity on eToro, Robinhood, and all the likes of such platforms that had a huge surge in retail, in individual investors that started joining those platforms and in investing. So I think that 2020 was a very good year from that perspective, that a lot of people took interest into investments. But also, and specifically for Romania, 2020 was also somehow the culmination of UiPath, and somehow there were already some IPO talks back then. So people would understand that there could be a huge global company born out of Romania, and that, I think, fueled a lot of enthusiasm around the tech ecosystem in Romania. And that's why I think more people, joined the tech bubble somehow. I'm not calling it a bubble because it would burst, but I'm calling it a bubble because, it's still a relative small community of people. So from my perspective, I think, these are two, three factors. So pandemic correlated to the fact that more people are investing, and correlated to the fact that UiPath was also on that journey. Also, FinTech OS raised a big round, I think, in 2021. So I think those factors showed somehow to people that were not professional investors that you can actually make money out of investing in Romanian tech companies. So that provided a good context to start and to grow for the first years. And on top of that, what was also very helpful also on the context side was the fact that there was a new European legislation coming into play, and looking and speaking with other people in the industry, legislation in this specific sector, can kill a business. I mean, I don't know. We've been in talks with some people in the Netherlands or in Austria or in Germany, and there literally were platforms that were killed due to legislation. So we benefited in Romania from a first mover advantage because there was no platform existing. So that allowed us to grow within a relatively friendly legal landscape. And when the European legislation came into place, we were there, to somehow, we also participated in the first drafts of, in the discussions of the first drafts of the legislation. So I think that allowed us to be, from basically when I joined 2021, we were already somehow compliant to the new rules that would enter into force in 2022. So I think that was also very, very helpful. So these factors were very helpful for SeedBlink's growth, especially in the first couple of years, I would say.
Nice. Okay. So yeah, good product fit. Basically, the startup came at the right moment, at the right time, in the right place.
Yeah.
So the company went from being a 10 people company when you joined to now almost like 50 people. I know you had also a lot of different roles in the company, and you grew a lot within that company as the company grew. Can you share more about your journey within the group?
So I think, the funny story somehow is when I joined, I more or less had no idea what the investments were. So before SeedBlink, I was just, seeing startups from afar. Somehow I used to do some scouting work for Impact Hub in Austria. I did some scouting work for BCR, but it was more, a research-based scouting somehow. I mean, looking up databases, understanding, different kinds of metrics, but I had no contact to the startup world whatsoever, nor to the investment world. So it was definitely a leap of faith from the part of, the founders, Carmen and Ionuț, that hired me, saying, okay, you seem like a decently educated guy, and who seems that he wants to work. That was the main topic of the interview. Like, are you willing to work? I said, I guess I am. And that was a leap of faith that was necessary to start at the beginning from both sides. So I joined as a junior analyst in the team. The first 6 months for me were mostly dedicated to learning. Learning what a startup is, learning what an investment is in a startup. How do you do a capital increase? What's a convertible loan? What's an equity fundraise? What's a SAFE? Because SAFEs were relatively hyped back then. And the first 6 months were really dedicated for me for learning. And it was also, I think, a good timing, because when for those 6 months were still very focused on Romania. So we were still, focused on growing the business in Romania, but we already had, the plans on what happens after. Because we're also a venture-backed business ourselves. So the nature of venture-backed businesses is that you need to grow exponentially at some point of time, and that growth we knew that growth could only be achieved at the European scale, and Romania would definitely not suffice to justify the growth that we were planning for. So that after the 6 months we started looking abroad. We took an investment round back then, and we started what internationalization for SeedBlink actually meant. So then I would say the second half of 2021 were the first tests, pilots of international startups coming onto SeedBlink. And then 2022. So when that happened, I started, having a more senior role. Somehow it became an investment manager, starting bringing my own deals, generating deal flow. So and I was mostly, focused on getting international startups. Then the team grew, so we added a couple of people in the investment team. We started focusing on each of us had started focusing on different regions and countries. We opened up an office. So and then 2022 came, and 2022 was really dedicated to internationalizing. So that was the year when we said, let's build up the organization in such a way that we actually grow the company internationally. So we opened up an office. The first branch was in Sofia, was in Bulgaria. Then it was Greece. And in August last year, we announced our first M&A with the Dutch platform called SeedBlink, which is one of the oldest investment platforms in Europe. I think they've been around for 12 years, something like that. So really one of the first. So they've seen it all somehow, and they had a lot of interesting stories to get from there. So 2022 was really dedicated to international expansion and international growth. So my role naturally was dedicated to being an investment manager. I was specifically focused on Greece. So brought around 8 companies from Greece. We fundraised around 1.5 million euros last year for Greek startups. So that was my focus last year. But I was still touching other countries as well. So and then I was promoted as team lead in the investment team, and that was, I think, last August somehow when we started splitting also the functions more. And then at the beginning of the year, the beginning of this year, I was promoted, as you mentioned, the head of the investment management team. And now it's interesting because we also shifted somehow our team structure. We're more decentralized. So each country, and I'm the only one who is somehow countryless. But countryless is a strong word, because I'm responsible now for growing the DACH region. So this is our next step in terms of geographical expansion. So as mentioned, we're now, our core markets are Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, the Netherlands, or the Benelux region, and since June we announced officially that we're opening up the DACH branch. So we've already had 5 investments in the DACH region, and we're planning to add at least, I would say, 5 until the end of this year. So yeah, this is this has been the journey that I've had for the past 2.5 years.
Pretty amazing journey. There is one thing that really triggered my attention. So you mentioned that SeedBlink, let's say, used to be a Romanian company and became a European company, in the sense that it wants to be present at continent level. However, from what I understand, I still see a pattern which is very common to startups in the region, that there was first this need to expand to a neighbor country before moving forward. Was it, from the founder perspective, was the first, let's say, ambition just to be a regional player, and then they realized that basically they could go to the next level? Or was it in the founder's mindset already clear that they wanted to basically be present all over Europe?
Yeah, no, I think that the company from day one had a European purpose, and the reason for that is the SeedBlink came into life also because there's a lack. There's no real competition right now at the European level. If you look at existing players in the investment platform business, most of them are local. It's a French, so you call them it's a French platform, it's a UK platform, it's a German platform, but until now there's been no player that managed to transcend geography, and there are several reasons for that. Mainly legal and culture. Legal was taken care of because there's now a European-wide legislation. Culture, you cannot take away culture, and that's the beauty and the curse of the European Union, is the fact that you have 27 countries, 27 nationalities, 27 ways of doing things. So, but we think that that's the complexity of it makes it, a big enough challenge. And we think that the next European champion, the next technology champion will be European. And we want as SeedBlink to be part of allowing people to be part of those next European success stories. So to answer your questions, the mindset was from day one European. And then, the question was, how do you get there? And we chose, because it's also the specificity of this business. We're not a software that can be sold throughout the world. We're a business that requires, relationships, somehow feet on the ground. And by feet on the ground, it's again coming back to networking. How do you generate deal flow? How do you build trust in those local markets? So for us, we thought of Romania, Bulgaria, Greece as places where you could build trust and extend the trust that we had in Romania to Bulgaria and then to Greece. And then in the Netherlands, we chose the M&A route because we thought that would accelerate our growth, and we're seeing that it actually did.
So this expansion, country by country, meant that on one side you had to find startups willing to be on the platform, but then you had to find investors. This investor ecosystem, is it somehow borderless, or you really have to spend a lot of efforts finding investors in the country before or soon after bringing a startup from that country?
So, we are under the belief that if you have good companies from that country, investors will come. And that's more or less the reality of things. Because if you bring bad quality companies, investors from that country won't come. So it's definitely not borderless. Not fully borderless. It may be a certain percentage. We're seeing that from the community of our investors, especially from the early days. We're seeing increased international activity, so to speak. So Romanian investors investing in Dutch companies, Dutch investors investing in Greek companies. So we're seeing this international factor for sure. And it depends on a round, and it depends on each investment that we're making, and probably anywhere between, we can have rounds where between 10% to 50% are international, so not from the initial country of that startup. So I think from that perspective, it really depends on each investment and on the trust that you're building in that country. And I think it's definitely a snowball effect. So coming back, our belief is that if we bring good companies, we'll get investors as well in every new country.
And I guess, the more you grow, the easier that is, because you always build up a community out of each basic investments you're making.
And you build up a track record that shows, it's definitely been harder the first time. It's less hard the second time.
And I don't know if it's a black or white, if there is a black or white answer to that, but would you say it's easier to bring startups or investors? Because I guess startups are looking for, raising funds, and any type channel might be relevant for them. But investors, they really need to they put their money, especially business angels. So I think there is a lot of work to be done in terms of building trust, whatever. So.
It's definitely, I think it's definitely harder to get investors. And maybe that's also the reason why we're not particularly looking at getting investors. We think that if we have good companies, good investors will come. So we're trying to get investors by getting good companies. But it's and then of course it bears the challenges, how to find those good companies, especially in a new market where you don't have a brand.
Okay. Now let's go back to SeedBlink with a French market. First, we're on French Tech Romanian Touch on air, so That's the first reason. Second, you're pretty francophone as a person, and you live in Paris. What's the relationship between SeedBlink and the French market today?
So to be honest, I think, so first of all, we're not actively present somehow in the French market. It's definitely, it's a very big European market, probably the second largest after the EU market, not excluding the UK. It's probably the largest market after Germany in terms of investments and also, platform investments. And so that's why I say I think we're now somehow in a exploratory relationship. Somehow me being there definitely helps in, meeting people, having some discussions. We still haven't decided yet to fully do the jump and say, okay, let's start building a branch, but this may happen in the coming years. So right now, I would say to summarize, we're in an exploratory relationship somehow.
But from what I understand, you already have, from what I know actually, you already have some French investors.
Yeah. So I think that there are two aspects here. So we had the fundraise for Bonap. So a Romanian company with French founders, and we've seen that as a result, French investors invested in Bonap. But not only that, but we also benefited from the Romanian diaspora in France. So we've seen French investors coming, Romanian investors living in France, and talking to their friends and investing into the deal flow that we had. So I think we already have, but it's the very early days. Maybe a couple of dozens of active investors from France.
And from what you see from this exploratory phase with the French market, what are the strengths of that market, but also the cons for a company like yours?
So for us, I think that we already had some discussions with different platforms in France, and there are a couple of things that that make it difficult. It's a huge market, and that makes it attractive, but there are a couple of things that make it difficult for us. And the number one reason is because it's such a big market, there's already a lot of funding available. And on top of that, there's a stigma, and I would call it, let's say, a bias against platform investing, against crowdfunding, because it's associated to dumber money. So you especially because we're looking, at good companies. So good companies, the traditional route of venture capital for good companies is to go to a VC firm. They would get an investment, and that would be it. Now we're seeing that slowly but surely there's a trend into getting more angels, but the argument is that those angels will bring very pointed added value. And what we're trying, and what we've achieved in other markets is saying that, on top of your VC, on top of your angels, you should also bring in the wisdom of a community around it, be anywhere between 30 to 100 people that can open up smaller doors, that can help with some intros, can help with some advice, that can help with funding afterwards as well. So, and definitely France is a place where there is this bias against community, not community, against crowdfunding, against platform investing. So, and on the other side, so that's one challenge for sure. The second one is crowdfunding until now has been seen as an alternative. So, most people know crowdfunding from, Kickstarter, Indiegogo as a donation-based. And then, there was the second wave of equity investments, equity crowdfunding. But still a lot of people associated to B2C companies, which is not the case. In our reality, I think more than 80% of our companies are B2B. Okay. So, and on top of that, there's again this misconception that crowdfunding is for very early stage. We've done deals from pre-seed to Series A plus, Series B. So we don't think that, and I think this is again a bias that we're working with and against. But besides this, it's a huge market. There are a lot of international investors that are starting to invest in France. So US investors that are starting branches in France. So that's super encouraging because definitely France will be a pillar of European growth for the companies. So yeah, I mean, we have to be able, and I think that's the challenge in what we're doing, is we have to be able to position ourselves in the funding and in the investment space, in somehow the middle between VCs, between business angels, between crowdfunding, and trying to explain to everyone that we're somehow aligned with the interests of everyone.
Okay, cool. So good luck on the French expansion when that would be happening. 30 campaigns have happened on SeedBlink, thanks, like, out of, let's say, the startup you sourced. But you told me that basically in total you may have sourced around 300 startups. So we are at the ratio of 1 out of 10. I would like to understand, because we have a lot of viewers which are basically startup founders. What are the most common mistakes that startups are doing when they knock at your door?
So I think that one of the the first disqualifying factor is the quality of the materials, to be honest. I mean, it may sound very stupid, but if you don't have a warm recommendation or a warm intro, and I don't know, if someone would introduce you to me, and that someone is an acquaintance or a friend, then there are higher chances I would speak to you. But if we speak for the first time without any introduction, and the quality of your materials are poor, and by materials it can be it can be a one-pager, it can be a pitch deck, it can be whatever, any variation of that. If those documents are poor, not easy to understand, or not easy to get what you're doing and how you're making money, and how and where do you want to be, I think that's the first disqualifying factor. So as a founder, I would definitely focus on building a good first impression. And then that also translates to the quality of your financials. How do you present the forecast? How do you present your current? And then we dive into the topic of how do you build a pitch deck. From my perspective, I think a pitch deck should have enough information to show who's the team, why are you the right people to do what you're doing, what are you doing. I've seen decks where after reviewing the deck, I didn't understand what the company was doing, and I think that's an instant kill factor. So understand what the company is actually doing, showcase somehow some understanding of what the market is and where you're going, but more importantly also show some kind of traction. So we've done this and that, and we need, and I also think it's helpful to show why do you need that investment and where is that investment going to take. So this is, I think, the first thing that I would focus on. So that's what I would definitely do.
And I guess you also receive like projections from the startups, and I think there is this mindset from many startup owners which are like, oh, we need to sell a dream. And the bigger the dream, the less realistic that might be. Like, what's your take on that? Should a startup founder sell you a dream, or be extremely pragmatic, maybe even pessimistic about their projections?
I mean, I think that there's a right balance. Because I recently seen a forecast that was going until 2045.
Okay.
I was like, what the fuck? Honestly, like, it makes no sense. How do you forecast that? So my take on forecast is you need to show the assumptions on which that forecast is built, and you can show whatever numbers if you can explain that we are under these assumptions, and these assumptions actually make sense. Because I've seen there are some forecasts in which you're saying we'll get the 95 market coverage, 95% market coverage. How is that realistic? Or you can play around with different scenarios, but I don't think it's helpful to say, especially when you talk to investors, tell them, yes, I think these numbers are conservative. I don't think that's helpful, because investors know that regardless of what you're showing, you'll probably won't get there. I mean, probably 90%, more than 90% of startups don't achieve their target. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm assuming that that's the case. So I think that my take is be honest and work smartly around building up that forecast. So if you think you can get there, sure, but how do you get there?
Okay. So out of these startups, you source 300 startups. So you receive files, introductions, whatever. How many go to the first meeting phase?
Well, I would say so. So those 300, I would say that those are 300 that I've seen or talked to.
Okay.
So probably there are another, couple of hundred behind that don't reach
that stage. Okay. So out of all the applications you get, you might actually get 1 out of 100 that basically starts a campaign on SeedBlink.
I'll have to run the numbers and check the numbers, but I would assume that from every new discussion that we have, probably so not every new discussion. Sorry. So for every startup that we see, until the campaign is probably 1 in 20.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
It's around 5%, depending on quarter, year, etc.
And you find some markets where there is more maturity from a startup standpoint. Like, can you tell in this country most of the documents we get are accurate? It's an interesting project, or in other markets when there is more immaturity?
Well, to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I think there's clearly a learning curve, and the quality of documents improved, I think, over the past 3 years. But I mean, I don't like generalization, so I would say that I don't think there's a difference between geography. I just think it's a difference between maturity of
Okay. So now more about yourself. Since I've known you, so I think it's been 6 years already, almost 7. You always had this entrepreneurial spirit. You have been involved in many, a lot of projects. So first of all, can you share a bit more about your entrepreneurial roots? Where does it come from?
Sure. So I think it definitely comes from the family and the background that I've been raised with. So my parents are both entrepreneurs. So they built traditional businesses. So they didn't build technology companies but they always had this flair for looking for opportunities. So I grew up with that, and for us, Saturdays, Sundays were normal working days somehow, and I felt somehow the responsibility of being your own bosses, and, building your own business and having to and you don't live from a paycheck, you live from the business that you create. So I think that definitely I grew up with that. So I grew up with that mindset. And that was natural for me. On top of that, I think also the way somehow my brain works, I'm not, even when I was in school, I always had new ideas somehow, and I was very, in order for me to be, good in something, I needed to do other 2-3 things in parallel, because otherwise I would just, I don't know, get bored of one topic. So I think that just somehow natural to how I was doing things, I needed to do more things in parallel. So when I was in school, it was sports, and it was sports, and then some extracurricular activities. So I was doing some volunteering. I was doing some, I organized some conferences, some events, public speaking. So these kinds of things, that you do, that I did in high school, and I think that was very, very helpful, because it helped me gather some kind of structure, and I had some events or some projects that were complete failures, and I had some projects that were successes, and looking back, that actually helped me to have a first touch of what you can do with your own hand. So some kind of responsibility and accountability of what you're doing, and if you actually do that, it can actually lead to something. So I think that's super important, especially for young people, is to see that from their work things can actually, there's an output. So that was high school. Then I tried different business ideas. When I finished high schools, all were somehow relative failures. But it was a big learning curve. So I remember I was 19. I looked a couple of days ago into the first limited company so the SeedBlink in Romania that I founded. It was in 2018. So I was 19, and we started off doing that company in order to sell coffee. I'm a big coffee fan. It's funny looking back now, because I lost all my savings in that company, but it was, we tried selling something that made relative no sense. I mean, it was a super niche product in a super niche market. And obviously, like now looking back, it was, doomed to fail. But I think it was a very, I paid taxes. I saw, what it means to set up a firm, what it means to sell something. I now realize we also pivoted. So we started by selling coffee, and then we realized very soon, in like 1 or 2 weeks, that it didn't actually work. So we went into also doing events. That was relatively okay, but not sustainable in any way. Like, you need to be there with your time. So I very soon realized that I want to, detach myself from, even before the pandemic and the trend of, working remotely, or I felt that the need to detach myself from my presence equal my output. So, that was fun. Not back then, but now probably looking back. And so I did a couple of projects around coffee, but there were mostly projects. So that's how I looked at them, rather than proper business.
And how is that helping you in your relationship with entrepreneurs you're meeting on a daily basis?
I think that the important thing, from investors, there are some. I feel like at heart I am an entrepreneur. So at heart I relate to the struggle that those founders have, and also SeedBlink is a very particular beast, so to speak. So we're not a fund. We're not we're not a business angel. We're not an institutional investor. We are a company with our own revenue targets, with our own investors, with our own, shareholders' expectations that we have to deliver upon every month. So because of that, I think that, one thing where we're good at SeedBlink, and most of the people from our investment team are actually natural salespeople, so to speak. And that helps us, relate to problems where founders have, because we also have the same problems. We need to generate revenue, we need to increase sales, like any other startup.
Cool. Nice. I have one last question. Can you share more about the future of the company?
Sure. So I think it's been a very interesting year, 2023, because we launched a new product actually last month in June. We officially launched a new product called Nimity, and not only it's a new product, but it's somehow we're adapting our vision of what SeedBlink is going to become. So when we started SeedBlink, it was an investment platform, and that's what we were doing. So we were facilitating access for people to invest in technology companies. And the long-term game was, building a European investment platform where you could invest in Belgian, Bulgarian, Estonian companies. And that evolved into a discussion where we're saying, we want somehow to build a tech stock exchange, so a European tech stock exchange. And in order to do that, we very soon realized that we also need to create somehow a shareholder register and to facilitate the understanding of what it means to hold shares, what shares are, and facilitate the transactions between shares. So this new product called Nimity is actually a equity management platform that allows founders and shareholders or option holders to actually visualize how the shareholding looks like, to issue option plans, because option plans have a calendar of vesting, and it can soon become messy, especially when you hit scale. When you of course, when you're like you and your wife or your brother on the cap table of the company, you probably won't need our product. But when you start having 20 investors and 20 ESOP holders that have different vesting schedules, and no one knows exactly, and you probably use Excels for now. But what we want to bring is to build this layer of clarity with software, and on top of that, give it this layer of liquidity with SeedBlink. So the new vision somehow that we're pursuing is that SeedBlink and Nimity will have 3 layers somehow. So we'll have a primary market, which is what we've been doing for the past 3 years. We also launched in March the first secondary market. The first for us. So a secondary market. I am saying it first because it's the first version of it somehow. So right now it's only available for our investors that invested into the companies that we sourced. But the idea is to build it on its own, of its own merits, and allow other secondaries to happen on this secondary market. So not first investments, but actually transactions between different shareholders. And the third layer is this with Nimity, where we're basically allowing people to track their shareholdings, generate scenario modelings, and give it this layer of liquidity with SeedBlink. So with the financial services, either on the primary market or a secondary market. So the idea is that if you're an ESOP holder and you hold shares in a company, those vested shares, you could sell them on the secondary market. And this is something that hasn't been done as such in Europe.
And for our audience, is there any podcast you'd like to recommend?
So I think that I really enjoy Tim Ferriss. So Tim Ferriss is an entrepreneur himself and an author. But I think his biggest strength is interviewing people, and he built out a book that is actually a series of interviews with people, and super successful people in different industries and ways of life, and he's very good at asking questions. So I would definitely recommend looking up Tim Ferriss. He has now, I think, 300 or 400 episodes of that. I started listening to him, I think, 5 years ago or something like that. And one of the very recent interviews he did was with Bill Gurley, which is one of the partners or founding partners at Benchmark, which is the VC that investing in Uber, in Uber's seed. So they had a very interesting discussion about, and Bill Gurley had a background from Wall Street, which is different than what you see in VC investors, because VC investors can come from different different paths. But he had this Wall Street background and understanding of public markets that helped him. As he says, helped them source better deals at seed stage. So this is something that it was a very interesting. It's a 2-hour podcast, but I would definitely recommend it.
Perfect. Eric, thanks a lot for your time today. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye. I would like to be very thankful to Commons Romana for hosting us in this amazing location today. If you like this podcast, please don't hesitate to give us a nice review, thumb up on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast. Don't hesitate also to listen to our older podcasts. And to make sure you don't miss out what's coming next, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye.